Rising concern of virus spread as Wuhan rolls out its mass testing. Videos show worrisome scenes at test sites. As more cities in northeastern China go under lockdown, Shenyang city shuts down a military hospital. No one is allowed to enter or leave. The pandemic has dealt the Chinese economy a heavy blow, but internal files we obtained show the local officials inflated the country's GDP, and the real picture could be worse than what the officials are saying. The pandemic has prompted countries around the world to rethink their relationships with communist China. Today, we look at one of the most controversial areas to cooperate with China on, the organ transplant industry. And the U.S. State Department slamming cyber attacks by hackers linked to the Chinese regime. The FBI is warning Americans the attacks target organizations working on a virus vaccine. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. On May 12th, Wuhan began a 10-day initiative to test its entire 11 million residents for the CCP virus. This video shows medical staff and police at one testing station. At a May 11th meeting, the CCP secretary for Wuhan called the current situation the new normal in epidemic prevention and control. A local resident posted on social media that their 5,000-person community is locked down. You can enter, but you can't freely leave. Residents are upset. Some have work commitments, but they can't leave, which means unemployment. They have no income and no way to support their family. More than 1 million people in Wuhan will be tested every day. In this video, people are unable to maintain social distancing while lining up. Some netizens who got tested were worried when medical staff didn't change gloves. One wrote, "I was a bit worried. The medical worker was wearing protective clothing and gloves during the test, but I didn't see him put on new gloves before it. Is there a risk of cross-infection if he doesn't change gloves before administering a cotton swab into each person's throat?" A Wuhan citizen, Mr. Wang, told us he believes there are 4 reasons for the large-scale testing. First, the 2 most important Chinese political meetings will be held on May 21st. The Chinese regime wants to show they are strengthening measures in combating the virus and make Wuhan residents stay at home during the testing period so they can't spread the virus elsewhere. Second, Chinese authorities want to find some asymptomatic cases and shift the blame to them. Third, to use up the testing kits that were exported to other countries and later returned because of their low accuracy. Fourth, there are already many cases in the city and authorities can no longer cover it up and have to come clean. He believes some patients at makeshift hospitals were released in March and April on political orders, even though they still hadn't recovered and they've already infected other people. This video shows a man lying unconscious inside a Wuhan park. He was later taken away by ambulance. The video was reportedly taken on May 10th. More cities in northeastern China are going under lockdown. Shenyang city in Liaoning province has reportedly shut down its 463 hospital, a military hospital. Reports say the hospital has been closed after a virus case was discovered. The man taking a video says no one is allowed to enter or leave. A woman waiting outside says her foot is in pain, but she can't go in. And a car seen attempting to leave is also stopped. In another northeastern city, Jilin, panic buying has driven prices high. A resident said rice is now 10% more expensive than before. And the price of potatoes is also 4 to 5 times higher than before. Taiwan Pochin Group is the world's largest athletic and casual footwear manufacturer for major global brands like Nike and Adidas. But it was forced to close its Hubei factory, with more than 4,000 employees losing their jobs. According to Chinese media, Pochin's total revenue for the first 4 months fell by 22%, the lowest it's been in 6 years. According to Radio Free Asia, Li Henqing, director of the Washington Information and Strategy Institute, said China's economy is entering a phase of decline because of its imbalanced economy, the U.S.-China trade war, and the pandemic. Some Chinese economists estimate China's unemployment rate is between 20% to 25%, far exceeding the Chinese official figure of 6.2% in February and 5.9% in March. Over 100 members of the European Parliament are urging the EU to back Taiwan's participation in the World Health Organization. The open letter is co-signed by 102 European parliamentarians and member state national assemblies. It calls for Taiwan's participation in the upcoming World Health Assembly on May 18th. The letter states, as the virus knows no borders, nationalities, and ideologies, the world needs to share all available information and expertise that can be helpful to combat the pandemic, and allow Taiwan to share its successful experience in handling the COVID-19 pandemic at the meeting. They urge a return to the 2009 to 2016 format when Taiwan was allowed to participate as an observer, something the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have already officially called for. Australia's largest trade union is backing Prime Minister Scott Morrison's tough stance on the Chinese regime. The May 14th letter states free trade must be fair. Australia must stand up to China to protect national sovereignty and local jobs. The Chinese regime is threatening massive trade tariffs on barley and goods after Australia's push for an investigation of the virus origins. The trade union petition calls on the Prime Minister and the government to stand up to China's bullying, protect Australian sovereignty and jobs, and declare its intentions to work with nations that support free, fair trade. The Australian Workers' Union currently has around 100,000 members. China's economy has been hit hard by the pandemic. We obtained internal documents showing local officials inflated the country's GDP. The real picture is worse than the official data. NTD's Catherine Wen reports.
China's economic data has long been questioned by economists and investors. We obtained internal documents that shows one city significantly overstating its numbers. The leaked files come from Shenyang city in the northwestern Shanxi province. In early May, the city released its first quarter GDP numbers, including details for its 13 subdivisions called counties or districts. In China, local governments submit economic data to their higher-ups. Comparing the internal data we obtained from the counties with what the city told the public shows the city significantly exaggerated its numbers. Take Sanyuan as an example. The county reported a 1.7 billion yuan first quarter GDP, but the city published 3.7 billion yuan, more than double the original number. The city also overreported two other counties' GDP by about 300 million to 400 million yuan. In total, the GDP for the three counties' first quarter was inflated by about 60%. That equals 2.7 billion yuan, or around $500 per person more. The official numbers themselves also don't add up. Due to the economic hit from the virus, only one county recorded positive growth, meaning most of their economies shrank. Yet 9 of the 13 counties' GDP figures are higher than last year's. GDP growth is an important target in Chinese economic policy, and local officials have strong incentive to inflate the numbers for political gain. The Chinese National Bureau of Statistics says the national economic data is also regularly reported to international organizations including the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Economists have pointed out that China's economic data is not reliable and the situation is worse than official data. Chinese officials said in April the country's economy shrank nearly 7% in the first quarter. But as the leaked files reveal, the damage from the pandemic could be much greater. Reuters reports, due to rising tension between the U.S. and China, HSBC on Tuesday lowered its estimate for Chinese GDP growth this year from 3% to 1.7%.
The pandemic is prompting countries around the world to rethink their relationship with communist China. Today, we look at one of the most controversial areas to cooperate with China on, the organ transplant industry.
China recently reported 2 lung transplants on CCP virus patients, each with waiting times of just a few days, raising suspicions of organ harvesting. China's organ transplant industry has long been controversial for its extraordinarily short waiting periods. In the U.S., although 150 million people have registered as donors, they might have to wait for years to get a transplant. Authorities in China say there are 1.9 million registered donors. The waiting time can be as little as 2 weeks. In 2018, a BBC reporter raised a question to the head of China's National Organ Transplant Committee.
Well, how come I rang up? I was offered a liver very quickly from a hospital in China. How is that possible?
I don't want to listen and answer the question somebody with some political agendas.
Last year, an independent people's tribunal in London found that the Chinese regime has been and continues to be harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience.
We, the tribunal members, are all certain, unanimously and sure beyond reasonable doubt, that in China, forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience has been practiced for a substantial period of time, involving a very substantial number of victims.
Yet over the years, China has been getting international help for its organ transplant system. One notable example is Spain. According to a 2018 report by state media Global Times, China's National Organ Donation and Transplant Committee head Huang Jiefu praised Spain for the help it's given China's organ transplant industry over the years. He said, right now, over 2,000 frontline organ transplant coordinators in China's organ donation and transplant industry were trained with the help of Spain. Spain has the most organ donors worldwide. One of its top transplant experts, Martin Manulik, has worked with China for many years. The Spanish surgeon is the president of Spain's Donation and Transplant Institute, a non-profit group which promotes organ donations. Chinese state media reported that in 2013, the institute signed a 5-year contract, which requires it to help China train medical staff to coordinate organ transplants. Spain also helped push China's organ transplant industry onto the international stage. In 2010, the head of China's Organ Transplant Committee was invited to speak at a major international organ transplant conference in Madrid. In 2013, a team of Spanish experts, including Manulik, went to Beijing's Wuhan hospital to speak about Spain's experience in organ donation and transplant. Manulik's Organ Transplant Institute has also been offering training sessions at the First Hospital of Kunming since 2014. The hospital is listed as a suspect for its involvement in forced organ harvesting by an overseas watchdog on China's organ transplants. In 2019, Manulik told Chinese state media that China's organ transplants are good enough to become the model of the world. Chinese authorities say the country conducted over 20,000 organ transplants in 2018, but the China Tribunal found that the real number of transplants in China is between 60,000 and 90,000 a year, and the main source of these organs are practitioners of the persecuted spiritual group Falun Gong. It also says China's Muslim minority, up to 1.5 million of whom are now kept in concentration camps, are at risk of becoming the next organ bank. In a 2017 interview by state media, the head of China's National Organ Donation and Transplant Committee spoke frankly about China's ambition to lead the world in organ transplants.
That in just a few years, China will become the #1 organ transplant country in the world.
And China is ready to export that model to other countries. Last December, China held an international conference called the Belt and Road Organ Donation International Cooperation Development Forum. China said that it will actively promote international exchanges and cooperation in organ transplant among countries along the Belt and Road. But author and lead researcher of a 2018 study on China's organ transplant abuse, Grace Yin, warned that by expanding agreements to share organs with other parts of Asia, Belt and Road regions, and beyond, the Chinese regime also risks implicating the international community in its crimes. Spain's organ transplant world is not alone in voicing support for China. Jose Nunes, a World Health Organization officer who oversees global organ transplantation, told Chinese state media last year that China's organ transplants are on the right path and in line with the guiding principles of the WHO. He also said that as long as China follows its current path, all the anti-China voice and disinformation will disappear by itself. Last year's China Tribunal was chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice, QC, a British barrister and part-time judge at London's Central Criminal Court. He worked at the International Criminal Court in the former Yugoslavia from 1998 to 2006 and led the prosecution of Serbia's former president Slobodan Milosevic. Sir Geoffrey Nice strikes a similar note in the tribunal's final judgment.
Any who interact in any substantial way with the PRC, including doctors and medical institutions, industry and businesses, most specifically airlines, travel companies, financial services businesses, law firms, pharmaceutical insurance companies, together with individual tourists, educational establishments, and art establishments, should now recognize that they are, to the extent revealed in this judgment, interacting with a criminal state.
Reporting by Penny Zhou, NTD News.
President Trump extends an order designed to prevent national security risks via Chinese telecom giants. Meanwhile, the FBI and DHS say hackers backed by the Chinese regime have been trying to steal virus research from the U.S.
President Trump on Wednesday signed a year-long extension to an executive order preventing U.S. companies from using Chinese telecommunications equipment. The move is meant to protect national security. U.S. lawmakers said the president's 2019 order is aimed at Chinese companies like Huawei Technologies and ZTE. Originally signed in May 2019, the order declared a national emergency and gave the president the authority to regulate commerce. The U.S. Commerce Department is also expected to extend a license set to expire on Friday. The license allows U.S. companies to keep doing business with Huawei, which provides 5G network technology. The department had extended the license multiple times, but in March it questioned U.S. companies and organizations about how essential Huawei's networks were to them. Meanwhile, the FBI and a U.S. cybersecurity agency warned Wednesday hackers linked to the Chinese regime are trying to steal virus-related research. In a joint statement, the two agencies wrote the hackers are targeting valuable intellectual property linked to vaccines, treatments, and testing of the CCP virus. It said the hackers are backed by the Chinese Communist Party. Both federal agencies are urging U.S. organizations conducting virus research to increase cybersecurity practices to prevent this theft.
The U.S. State Department today condemning cyber attacks by hackers affiliated with the Chinese regime. The FBI has warned Americans that the hackers are targeting organizations working on vaccines for the CCP virus.
The U.S. Department of State is blaming hackers connected to the Chinese regime for trying to steal U.S. research into a virus vaccine. On Wednesday, the FBI and the Cybersecurity Agency warned companies researching the virus of the potential threat. The FBI notes the regime uses cyber actors and non-traditional collectors to steal U.S. intellectual property related to vaccines, treatment, and testing. Non-traditional collectors include professors and researchers, who are basically spies in broad daylight. The U.S. Department of State, in a statement to the press, has called on the People's Republic of China to cease this malicious activity. The statement goes on to say the PRC's behavior in cyberspace is an extension of its counterproductive actions throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. This isn't the first time the Chinese regime has been suspected of international theft. In February, the FBI ramped up investigations into China-related economic espionage. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's statement concludes that while the U.S. and its allies are working together to save lives, the Chinese regime continues to silence scientists, journalists, and citizens and to spread disinformation, which has exacerbated the dangers of this health crisis.
Taiwan says the World Health Organization and the Chinese regime have conspired for political purposes to lock it out of the WHO. Taiwan's vice president today criticized the WHO over a lack of professionalism and denying its mission of health for all.
Taiwan's U.S.-trained epidemiologist vice president said Thursday the World Health Organization responded too slowly to the CCP virus.
In reality, the World Health Organization has always done very well and made major contributions to human health. On the epidemic prevention regarding the Wuhan pneumonia, COVID-19, we mostly criticize them for acting too slowly.
Last year in December, Taiwan sent an email to the international health regulations focal point under the WHO, informing them of unknown pneumonia cases in Wuhan. They indicated the potential for a human-to-human transmission of an unknown virus. He also said the WHO has paid too much attention to politics and forgotten its neutrality by blocking Taiwan's participation in the organization.
In reality, the aim of the WHO is health for all. All the people in the world should possess the basic human right to be healthy. So there is not one person that should become an orphan of the healthcare net of the World Health Organization.
Taiwan took early and effective prevention work when the virus outbreak began. There are only 440 virus cases and 7 deaths reported among the 23 million population to date, which is among the lowest of the world.
Wisconsin State Supreme Court strikes down the state's stay-at-home order. Businesses reopened and people emerged from their homes against the wishes of the governor.
President Trump on Thursday applauded a Wisconsin Supreme Court decision striking down a virus lockdown order a day before. One of the justices compared the state's continued lockdown to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. She used the example to demonstrate the damage a state's use of unchecked emergency powers could cause. It's the first time a state Supreme Court has taken down a state's lockdown order. Residents flocked to bars on Wednesday evening after the court sided with lawmakers. They argued the state's top public health official exceeded her authority by imposing restrictions on businesses and daily life. Schools will remain closed until at least fall. President Trump referenced the ruling on Twitter, saying, "Its Democrat governor was forced by the courts to let the state open. The people want to get on with their lives. The place is bustling." Hitting back at the court ruling, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers urged residents to stay home, practice social distancing, and limit travel. The mayor of Wisconsin's largest city said his stay-at-home order would remain intact. Some counties also issue replacement orders that effectively keep the stay-at-home order going in those areas. Governor Evers says things could get confusing if each of Wisconsin's 72 counties make different rules.
When and how to reopen schools is on the minds of many. Trump said on Wednesday that we have to get schools open. Most schools are keeping instruction online for the rest of the year, but a handful are starting to make baby steps to get kids back in the classroom.
Figuring out how to restart school in the fall is proving to be a big test for Americans. Montana is among the first in the nation to move towards letting students come back to school.
The majority of our families wanted to come back at the middle high school level. It was about 64% at the middle high school that said if we were to open, they would come back.
But for now, in-person sessions are one-on-one and by appointment only for this Montana school. The superintendent said they are discussing how to reopen this fall. He says what's most important is to move forward.
Well, we thought it was important that we try to make steps to move forward, even though they're small steps.
Moving forward is on President Trump's mind, too, saying in a meeting with governors Wednesday that he'd like to see schools open.
And then some shouldn't open them quite yet. You know, they're not ready. They went through a lot and they're not quite ready. But no, we're opening our country. People want it open. The schools are going to be open.
He seems to be at odds with Dr. Fauci's comments on the matter. On Tuesday, Fauci told lawmakers about a possible second outbreak that could happen in the fall.
Having treatments available or a vaccine to facilitate the re-entry of students into the fall term would be something that would be a bit of a bridge too far.
Trump publicly said Thursday that he disagrees with Fauci's comments. One idea some states have considered is to have a rotating class schedule, with some students attending morning classes and others going in the afternoon. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Trump and Dr. Fauci's comments come as many colleges and universities, especially in the South, are set to reopen for in-person instruction starting this fall. Meanwhile, California State University says that in the fall, they'll keep most classes online. And in New York, the police union calls for Health Commissioner Dr. Barbeau to resign or be fired over heated comments she made. And New York City's mayor published Thursday's virus figures all show significant decreases, a big jump in the right direction, he says.
New York City police unions are calling for Health Commissioner Dr. Barbeau to be fired. The call comes after she allegedly showed contempt for New York police officers in a dispute over personal protective equipment in March. Chief of Detectives Terrence Monahan asked Dr. Barbeau for 500,000 masks for New York's finest when he reportedly received a rude response from her. The request was denied, and NYPD was told they would instead receive 50,000. She has since apologized for her words. The apology was accepted by Chief Monahan. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said on Thursday that all key virus indicators are declining. Most notably, ICU admissions are down from over 560 to 517. Hospital admissions and the percentage of people testing positive are also shrinking.
3 for 3, a perfect day, New York City. So let's now put together a bunch of them, and that's what's going to help us take the next big step forward.
He hinted that if progress continues, some restrictions could begin to lift in the first half of June. Governor Andrew Cuomo says 5 regions in central New York are now ready to open. Businesses in these regions can take their first steps towards reopening on Friday, when the statewide stay-at-home order lapses. But he warned about possible future emergencies and made it clear that the U.S. should no longer rely on other countries like China for basic medical supplies.
And we don't even have basic equipment for nurses and doctors. And so much of it came from China. And governors such as myself are trying to figure out, who do we know in China?
Also on Thursday, U.S. President Donald Trump dispatched $3.9 billion in federal funding to New York's Public Transit Authority, the MTA.
And if you happen to live in or around New York City, here's some good news. The Jersey Shore will be open in time for Memorial Day. Beaches and lakefronts can reopen, but gatherings such as concerts and fireworks will be prohibited. Reopenings will take effect on May 22nd. A rare inflammatory illness has killed 3 young people in New York State. Researchers are studying if there is any relationship between the rare sickness and COVID-19, the disease caused by the CCP virus. So far, there is no conclusive evidence that COVID is the cause. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
The New York State Department of Health is investigating 102 cases of a rare inflammatory syndrome in children under 21 years old. The illness presents similar symptoms as Kawasaki disease and toxic shock syndrome, such as rash, bloodshot eyes, prolonged fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. Kawasaki disease can lead to inflammation of the heart. This rare syndrome has taken the lives of 3 young New Yorkers. Attention has been growing over the possible link between the inflammatory syndrome and COVID-19. Among the scientific community, there is no conclusive evidence that shows COVID causes the inflammatory syndrome. On Wednesday, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo addressed the inflammatory syndrome and made the assumption that it is a manifestation of COVID, asserting the unproven claim that it is caused by COVID.
It's an inflammation of the blood vessels, which could affect the heart. So it's more of a cardiac case than a respiratory case, which is a new manifestation of the COVID virus.
Most of the young people who have this rare illness in New York are either COVID positive or have the antibodies, meaning they previously had COVID. But 14% of the cases tested negative for COVID and tested negative for the antibodies, meaning they did not have COVID and never had COVID. We spoke with an infectious disease expert at Johns Hopkins University. He says the inflammatory syndrome and COVID are temporally linked, simply meaning they are happening at the same time.
Right now, there have been some clusters of cases, a very small number in children that are coincident with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think this is an interesting linkage, but it's not proven yet.
He says we do not have all the data on this yet, and that it's important to actually prove causation before we definitively discuss this link. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
And new numbers coming from the UK show that a huge percentage of deaths happen in nursing homes. And in Japan, the Prime Minister partly has lifted the state of emergency.
More than 40% of all virus deaths in England and Wales have been in nursing homes. A new report from the London School of Economics shows the virus is to blame for more than 22,000 deaths in nursing homes in the 2 countries. British opposition parties blame Boris Johnson and the government for these deaths because they allegedly downplay the risks of the virus. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe lifted a state of emergency in large parts of the country on Thursday. It was removed in 39 of Japan's 47 prefectures. But he says it will remain in place in Tokyo and other major cities until the virus is contained. An agency which approves medicines for the European Union said that a vaccine to counter the virus could be approved in about a year in an optimistic scenario. The head of the agency said they are investigating 115 different therapeutics for the virus. Some of those treatments could be approved in Europe as early as this summer, though he didn't specify which ones.
A marine mammal amusement park in Hong Kong is facing possible bankruptcy without its usual visitors, but staff say they are determined to care for the animals despite the lockdown.
In wake of the pandemic, businesses around the globe are feeling a sense of uncertainty over whether or not they can survive financially. Hong Kong's Ocean Park is no exception. The region's lockdown has caused a dramatic drop in the park's visitors. With rides and seats empty, Ocean Park's earnings are now dangerously low. Chief Executive of Ocean Park, Matthias Lee, says the company is under great pressure. We estimate that we lost more than 1 million visitors from February to April. Under the situation of no revenue, we are more tightly controlling operational costs. Despite its financial dilemma, Ocean Park continues to care for its marine animals. One of their caretakers says he's worried about the park's future, but is still keeping the animals' best interests at heart. Because our job is to take care of the animals, no matter whether we have the coronavirus outbreak or not, we will continue to take care of them. Ocean Park is currently requesting almost $700 million from the government. If it doesn't receive the aid, the marine mammal park could go out of business by the end of June.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates and see you tomorrow.